Welcome to What the Wrestling, a show where I take a look at the various wrestling companies and the stuff they do that really scratches my head in confusion, and sometimes anger. We're almost exclusively looking at WWE here. First I want to talk about the AEW and Impact collaboration. AEW and Impact have been at this for a while. For months on end, they would run AEW commercials advertising Dynamite on Impact programming and have AEW stars appear on Impact for matches. And with very, very few exceptions, that was it the other way around. I've talked before about this and how it kind of feels like a one-sided deal. And I think it's made even more clear that that's the case at Rebellion, where they didn't find a way to have Kenny Omega still win and then not take the belt. They didn't find a way for Rich Swann to win and retain the belt. No, it was an absolute win for Kenny Omega taking the Impact title. Now, what they do with this from this point on might change my opinion about how the deal is constructed. But so far, it still feels like this collaboration heavily favors AEW. Like, absurdly favors AEW. And I'm bothered by it. Because AEW is the bigger company. It should almost be their duty to try to build up the other company, but I'm not the one in charge of all that. So, on to WWE, because last month we had Wrestlemania. And a lot of stuff happened at Wrestlemania, leading up to, during, and backlash after. At this point, it's important to note that I had recently gotten Peacock, the streaming service from NBC, because that was the only way I was going to be able to see Wrestlemania. It was exclusively on Peacock. Now, although it's one heck of a deal, and it's really cheap, and I'm likely to stick with Peacock for a while, right, possibly indefinitely, the organization on how Peacock runs its shows and interface is kind of frustrating. At least for wrestling. Because when Peacock manages their shows, they do it by season. It's probably a good way to organize it for other shows, but for wrestling, well, I'm going to give you an example. Say you wanted to watch WrestleMania 3, the classic third ever WrestleMania. Well, you'd go down to the pay-per-view section in the WWE Peacock area, and you'd have to look for WrestleMania. And for WrestleMania 3, you need WrestleMania Season 3, Episode 1. Doesn't tell you the year, it doesn't tell you anything like that, which is what it's going to make other pay-per-views really awkward, because maybe you don't remember what year a certain backlash happened. And so you don't, and you have no idea what season it was. And it's like, which backlash was it? You don't know. Well, maybe you only knew by year. But the point is, with Peacock's interface, you're kind of stuck. You don't know what was in each one. It's probably a small gripe, but that's one I had. Night 1, in particular, had a lot of problems with the weather. The first night of WrestleMania was delayed due to rain, since they decided to hold it outside. But this also caused a lot of problems with entrances during the One of the ladies coming down to the ring slipped and fell on her butt. Not her fault, just things were wet. Part of Seth Rollins' part of his entrance didn't light. It was supposed to be poles that were on fire, and not all the poles caught because they were wet. Sheamus was going for a white noise off the top rope. He slipped off the top rope, managed to save it, and just did the white noise on the mat. But the wetness was a big problem. As Michael Cole originally said, Wrestlemania. And then Jerry the King Lawler stole the joke. I've seen wrestling feuds start over less. So let's just have those two fight. Why not? It's got to be better than how Damian Priest and Bad Bunny versus Miz and Morrison turned out. Now, I will give credit where it was due. They obviously put a lot of training into Bad Bunny, the rapper turned wrestler, who has a definite love for wrestling, and put in a lot of training to be decent. And he actually, as far as celebrity guests go, was probably the best wrestler I've ever seen for a celebrity. But that could also be a problem. Because it's a temporary spot. By having a celebrity come in, just some random Joe come up and show up these pro wrestlers, show up these superstars, it basically goes like, oh, anybody can do this. With very little effort. And it doesn't necessarily make Bad Bunny look good, it makes the other superstars look bad. And I don't know about that. That's another confusing match. I guess it wasn't bad, but another confusing match was the New Day going up against AJ Styles and his pet Goliath, Omos. Now, up to this point, we had never seen Omos do anything in the ring. He was just standing there being intimidating. Well, it's not that... he wasn't bad. He was a standard big guy wrestler, but that's not the point. The match pretty much was them, New Day, keeping AJ Styles away from Omos so he couldn't make the tag. And then as soon as AJ did manage to slip through and tag Omos in, it was an insulting squash match that took like 2 minutes to finish up after Omos got in. It's not necessarily bad, it just seemed kind of silly, I guess. I mean, it really sells him as a monster, and AJ and Omos are now the tag champions, but I don't know. I think I wanted to see more of the guy actually do stuff, you know? Speaking of wanting to see more, and it resulting in something silly, was the Randy Orton versus The Fiend match at WrestleMania. Now, they had brought out this huge box structure. Turned out it was a Jack-in-the-Box. And Alexa Bliss actually turned the Jack-in-the-Box handle so that the Fiend popped out. And then the match began. Things were going out pretty standard, and then all of a sudden, for whatever reason, Alexa Bliss used dark magic to actually betray the Fiend and do her own thing, and we haven't seen the Fiend since. And now I am confused. And so she's apparently a witch more powerful than the Fiend or some nonsense. And she has her own little new stuffed friend, Lily. No doubt short for Lilith, which has some nice well, not mythological, well, maybe mythological aspects to it. I don't mind any of this. It's like a dark version of Al Snow's head. But, what gets me is they decide to do something unnecessary with special effects they could have used the money on for something more important. They have this sort of thing where they focus on Lily's weird doll face, and they have her do a giggle laugh, whatever. And then all of a sudden, you get this really bad and silly looking bite animation towards the camera. I think the last thing I have to talk about, though, is technically WWE, though also not. And that is some of the commercials that play during these wrestling programs. Particularly a series of commercials for Car Shield, starring Ric Flair. The retired legend is apparently now an employee at Car Shield, selling very special car insurance in his own Ric Flair way. It is a silly series of commercials, and confusing, yes, but yeah, they're fun. I like the Office style, like the Office style of talking about their employees, and then they show Rick doing stuff. Like, he goes to the employee fridge, sees his yogurt is missing. Asks, "Who took my yogurt?" And he looks over and there's some guy eating his yogurt, and he just picks up a random chair and just beats that guy and says, "How's that taste? Woo!" That's just what I wanted to leave you on. This episode was just mostly focused on WrestleMania. I definitely am going to have more to talk about next, I'll definitely have more to talk about next episode, but until then, I'll see you in the ring.